prominent actor insisted on having a larger trailer than Clint Eastwood during one of Clint's own film productions. When this actor arrived intoxicated the following day, Clint's handling of the situation would become the stuff of Hollywood legend. The incident took place during June of 1985 on the set of Pale Rider, filmed in the challenging terrain of Idaho's Sawtooth Range Mountains. Clint Eastwood was simultaneously directing, producing, and starring in what would eventually become one of his most commercially successful Western films. The production presented numerous complications from the start, shooting at high-altitude locations, constructing elaborate sets, coordinating dangerous sequences involving horses, dealing with the unpredictable weather patterns of mountain regions, and adhering to a demanding schedule that allowed absolutely no tolerance for delays or unprofessional conduct. The film required a talented ensemble of supporting actors, and Clint had consented to working with an actor who can be referred to as Marcus Brennan. Brennan had established himself as a recognizable figure in Hollywood, having recently completed 2 commercially successful films, and possessing the type of audience recognition that could assist in marketing a Western to younger demographics, who might not naturally gravitate toward the genre any longer. However, Brennan arrived with a well-established reputation that circulated throughout the entertainment industry. He had become known in Hollywood circles as challenging to work with, excessively demanding, prone to temperamental outbursts, and thoroughly convinced that his recent box office achievements entitled him to preferential treatment on every production he joined. His representation had cautioned Clint's production team that Brennan maintained specific prerequisites for any project in which he agreed to participate. Clint, who had established his entire production company, Malpaso, upon the foundational principles of operational efficiency and respect for crew members, harbored doubts about working with Brennan. But the studio executives were insisting on a recognizable co-star, and Brennan's agent provided assurances that he would conduct himself professionally. Despite his reservations and better instincts, Clint consented to casting Brennan in a substantial supporting role. The difficulties commenced even before filming started. Throughout the pre-production phase, Brennan's agent presented a comprehensive list of demands, including top billing positioned alongside Clint, approval rights over the script, authority to rewrite dialogue, and consultation privileges regarding costume selections. David Valdez, serving as Clint's producer, delivered the list to Clint's office. Clint reviewed it, maintaining an expressionless demeanor. He instructed Valdez to inform Brennan the answer was no. Valdez mentioned that Brennan was threatening to withdraw from the project. Clint responded that if Brennan chose to walk away, they would simply find someone else. Brennan's agent retreated on most demands, but one requirement persisted. His trailer needed to equal or exceed the size of Clint's own trailer. Clint's response was straightforward and simple. He told them to provide Brennan with whatever size trailer he desired, expressing complete indifference to the matter. What Brennan failed to comprehend was that Clint seldom actually utilized his trailer. He preferred remaining on the set alongside the crew members. The trailer served merely as a location for changing clothes. Production operations relocated to Idaho in early June. The base camp was constructed in an isolated area, complete with trailers, equipment, trucks, and temporary facilities designed to accommodate the 80-person crew. As explicitly stated in his contractual agreement, Brennan's trailer was delivered to the location, an enormous custom-built unit that was actually marginally larger than Clint's relatively modest accommodation. The cast and crew members observed this immediately. Brennan ensured they would notice, positioning his trailer in the most conspicuous location and making an ostentatious display of its various amenities. He provided interviews to visiting members of the press about his essential workspace and emphasized how crucial it was for him to possess the appropriate environment for his creative process. Clint offered no comment on the matter. He consistently arrived early each morning, worked throughout the entire day alongside the crew, and remained late into the evening reviewing preparations for the following day's shooting schedule. He never mentioned or referenced Brennan's trailer. He never needed to address it. His work ethic and professional conduct communicated everything necessary. However, Brennan subsequently began arriving late to the set. On the first day scheduled for filming his scenes, Brennan was required to report for a 6 o'clock in the morning call time to capture the morning light for a crucial sequence. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Clint and the crew had completed all preparation. The cameras had been positioned precisely. The background extras were in their designated places. The lighting conditions were ideal. Brennan's trailer door remained closed. At 6:15, the first assistant director knocked on Brennan's door. There was no response. At 6:30, he knocked again with the same result. Finally, at 6:45, Brennan emerged from his trailer, obviously suffering from a hangover, wearing sunglasses despite the early morning hour. Brennan announced to the first assistant director that he required an additional hour, explaining that he wasn't prepared and that his creative process demanded proper preparation. The assistant director looked toward Clint, who was standing in the vicinity. Clint's facial expression remained unchanged. He simply nodded and stated they would shoot around Brennan and proceed to scene 47. The entire crew scrambled to reposition equipment and personnel for a completely different sequence, thereby losing the perfect morning light that had been essential for Brennan's scene. The adjustment cost them 3 hours of valuable shooting time and necessitated bringing in different actors and alternative equipment. Yet Clint never elevated his voice, never displayed any frustration. He simply adapted to the situation and continued working efficiently. Brennan finally made his appearance at 8 o'clock in the morning, still wearing his sunglasses, and appeared genuinely surprised to discover that they had commenced shooting without waiting for him. He approached Clint, seemingly anticipating an apology for not holding production for his arrival. Clint calmly informed him that they were currently working on scene 47, and that Brennan would shoot his scenes the following morning at the same designated call time, adding firmly that he should not be late. Brennan laughed, producing a condescending sound that carried across the entire set. He declared that he was never actually late, but rather that he arrived when he was ready, explaining that this was an integral part of his creative process, and that great actors cannot be rushed in their work. Clint observed him for an extended moment, his face remaining completely unreadable. He reiterated that the call time was 6 o'clock the following morning, and that Brennan needed to be ready. Then he turned his attention back to the camera, effectively terminating the conversation. That evening, Brennan held an informal gathering in his oversized trailer, entertaining visitors while drinking heavily throughout the night. Multiple crew members subsequently reported overhearing him making disparaging and critical comments about Clint's directing approach, characterizing it as pedestrian and workmanlike, compared to what he considered real auteurs with whom he had previously collaborated. The following morning, Brennan was again scheduled for the same 6 o'clock call time. Clint and the crew arrived early, as was their consistent practice. The lighting conditions were once again perfect for the sequence they needed to capture. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Brennan's trailer remained dark and quiet. At 6:15, there was still no activity. The first assistant director knocked on the door. No response was forthcoming. At 6:30, Clint walked over to Brennan's trailer personally. The crew observed as he knocked firmly on the door. After a prolonged moment, Brennan opened it, clearly intoxicated or still suffering the effects of intoxication from the previous night. He was dressed in a bathrobe, his hair in complete disarray, his eyes visibly bloodshot. Brennan responded aggressively, asking what Clint wanted. Clint stated calmly that Brennan was late and that they were losing the optimal light. Brennan gestured vaguely with a glass that potentially contained alcohol, claiming he was preparing and suggesting that Clint wouldn't understand. He questioned whether Clint was really an actor anymore or merely a cowboy who points cameras. The crew, observing from a distance, became absolutely silent. Nobody addressed Clint Eastwood in such a manner. Not on his set, not on his production, not under any circumstances. Clint's expression did not alter. He stated quietly that Brennan had 15 minutes to be camera ready. He added that if Brennan was not ready, production would move forward without him. Brennan declared that Clint would wait for him, his voice increasing in volume. He claimed that Clint needed him, that the studio wanted him, and that he was the only reason anyone under 40 years of age would watch this movie. He called Clint a relic and suggested that Eastwood should be grateful he had agreed to work on this production. Clint turned and walked back to the set. The crew exchanged nervous glances among themselves, uncertain about what was about to transpire. 15 minutes elapsed. Brennan's door remained closed. At 6:45, Clint turned to his first assistant director and instructed him to mark Brennan as a no-show and proceed to scene 32. They filmed around Brennan for the remainder of that day, losing another crucial sequence that required the morning light. The production schedule was now significantly behind the planned timeline, and the budget was beginning to experience strain from the operational inefficiency. That evening, Brennan finally emerged from his trailer around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, apparently prepared to shoot. He found Clint reviewing dailies with the cinematographer. Brennan announced that he was ready at that moment and suggested they complete his scene. Clint, without looking up from the monitor, informed him that they had wrapped for the day. Brennan asked about the following day. Clint responded that the call time would be the same and that Brennan's call sheet would be delivered to his trailer. He remained focused on the footage throughout this exchange. Brennan and him appeared to sense that something fundamental had shifted in the dynamic, but his ego prevented him from backing down. He expressed approval and then suggested to Clint that perhaps next time he could demonstrate more flexibility, asserting that great performances require freedom rather than factory-like schedules. Clint finally looked up at him and advised him to get some sleep, noting that tomorrow would be a long day. The following morning, Brennan actually appeared relatively close to the scheduled time, arriving at 6:20 in the morning instead of 6 o'clock, which he considered progress in his own estimation. He strode onto the set with confidence, clearly expecting to receive praise for his improvement. What he encountered instead was a scene for which he was completely unprepared. The entire crew, all 80 individuals, were assembled and watching as he approached. Clint was standing in the center of the gathering, arms crossed, his face as expressionless as stone. Clint greeted Brennan good morning, his voice carrying clearly through the mountain air. Brennan returned the greeting, suddenly feeling uncertain. He asked if he was in the wrong location and what scene they were shooting. Clint informed him that they were not shooting anything at that moment and that they needed to have a conversation, which he wanted everyone present to hear. Brennan glanced around at the assembled crew, at the cameras that were not being prepared, at the strange stillness of what should have been a bustling set. Clint continued, his voice remaining calm but absolutely firm. He stated that Brennan had been late twice, that he had been drunk or hungover on the set, that he had insulted Clint's directing, the crew, and the work they were accomplishing. He also noted that the previous day, Brennan had told him he should be grateful for Brennan's participation in the film. Brennan began to offer an explanation, but Clint raised a hand to stop him, stating that he was not finished speaking. Clint recounted that Brennan had demanded a bigger trailer than him on his own production, and that he had granted that request. He mentioned that Brennan had demanded special treatment. He stated that Clint had given him that special treatment. He noted that Brennan had cost the production 2 days of shooting and thousands of dollars because of his inability to arrive on time, and that Clint had accommodated that as well. But the previous day, he pointed out, Brennan had shown up intoxicated and insulted people who had been working since before sunrise to make him look good on film. The mountain environment was completely silent, except for the sound of the wind. Every crew member was observing the scene. Brennan's face had turned pale. Clint explained what was going to happen next, his voice maintaining that same calm, quiet tone that somehow conveyed more authority than any amount of yelling could possibly achieve. He informed Brennan that his scenes were being removed from the film and that he was being written out completely. He stated that Brennan's contract was being terminated for breach of professional conduct. There was a vehicle waiting at the bottom of the hill to transport him back to Los Angeles. His personal belongings from the trailer would be packed and shipped to his agent's office within 48 hours. He was fired, effective immediately. Brennan's mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. He looked around desperately at the assembled crew members, perhaps anticipating that someone would object or come to his defense. Nobody moved from their positions. Nobody spoke a word. They simply watched. Brennan finally managed to form words, stammering that Clint couldn't simply fire him, mentioning his agent and the studio, suggesting they wouldn't permit this action. Clint responded that he was the producer, that it was his production company, his financial investment, his film, and that Brennan was finished. He reiterated that the car was waiting. Brennan declared this was insane, his voice increasing in volume. He asked if Clint knew who he was and what this would do to the film, insisting that Clint needed him. Clint replied simply in the negative. He stated that he needed people who showed up on time while sober and treated his crew with respect, and that Brennan represented none of those qualities. He repeated that the car was waiting. Brennan looked around once more, now desperate. He appealed to others to tell Clint he was making a mistake and that he needed Brennan. A young production assistant, a 19-year-old intern named Jenny, was standing in the vicinity. The day before, Brennan had yelled at her for bringing him the incorrect type of coffee, reducing her to tears. Now, Clint looked directly at her and addressed her by name. He asked her what time everyone should be on set the following day. Jenny responded quietly that it was 6 o'clock in the morning. Clint asked if she would be present at 6 o'clock. She confirmed that she would be, sir, her voice growing stronger. Clint stated that this made her more valuable to the production than Brennan had ever been. He turned back to Brennan and told him the car was waiting and advised him not to make the situation more difficult than necessary. Brennan stood there for another extended moment, perhaps waiting for someone to intervene, or for this to reveal itself as some kind of lesson or test. However, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the wind and the distant rumble of the car engine waiting to transport him away. Finally, Brennan turned and walked toward his trailer. 10 minutes later, he emerged carrying a single bag, walked past the assembled crew without making eye contact with anyone, and got into the waiting car. Nobody watched him depart. They had already turned back to their work, preparing for the first actual shot of the day. Clint addressed his first assistant director, stating they should make up for lost time and proceed to scene 32, first positions. And just like that, production resumed as though Marcus Brennan had never been present on the set. The account of what transpired on the Pale Rider set circulated through Hollywood within a matter of days. Brennan's agent attempted to characterize it as a creative disagreement, but too many crew members had been present and witnessed the events. The truth emerged. Brennan had been terminated for being intoxicated, late, and disrespectful. The impact on Brennan's career was immediate and catastrophic. Studios began withdrawing from projects to which he was attached. Directors who had previously expressed interest in collaborating with him suddenly were not returning his calls. Within 6 months, Brennan transitioned from being a rising star to someone who couldn't secure a meeting. The unofficial blacklist was not a result of Clint's influence or intervention. Clint never spoke negatively about Brennan in public forums. The blacklist existed because the story demonstrated something every producer and director feared. If an actor couldn't demonstrate basic professionalism on a Clint Eastwood set, where the expectations were transparent and the environment was known to be fair, then that actor represented a liability that no one wanted to risk taking on. Pale Rider proceeded to become a massive commercial success, earning over $40 million on a budget of $6.9 million. Critics praised it as Eastwood's finest Western since Unforgiven. The scenes that would have featured Brennan were rewritten and redistributed among other actors in the cast, and nobody missed his presence in the final film. Years later, during an interview, Clint was asked about the incident. His response was characteristically concise. He explained that everybody on a film set has a job to perform. If someone cannot do their job, they cannot remain there. It doesn't matter what their name is or what appears on their resume. Showing up on time, sober, and treating people with respect represents the baseline expectation. The story became legendary throughout Hollywood, not because Clint had been cruel or vindictive in his actions, but because he had done precisely what he stated he would do. There was no drama, no second chances offered, just clear expectations and immediate consequences when those expectations were not met. Today, the story continues to be recounted as an example of leadership and professional standards. The oversized trailer became a symbol, serving as a reminder that trailer size and recent success mean nothing without basic professionalism to support them. Jenny, the 19-year-old production assistant whom Clint defended, went on to become a successful line producer. She credits that particular moment with teaching her what genuine leadership looks like in practice. Marcus Brennan found work in smaller productions, but never regained his previous career trajectory. He tells people that Clint was difficult to work with and holds grudges. The crew members who were present tell a different story. They explain it was about showing up intoxicated, insulting people who worked harder, and learning that nobody is irreplaceable. If this story of accountability and professional standards resonated with you, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who needs to remember that talent without professionalism holds no value, and that respect isn't something anyone can demand, but rather something that must be earned. Have you ever witnessed someone face real consequences for unprofessional behavior? You're invited to share your story in the comments. Enable notifications for more stories about legendary figures who understood that how you treat people matters more than having your name above the title.